Though Cupra is a brand that hasn't been in Australia for very long, it's already made a big splash on the industry with its spicy Spanish aesthetic. And in an age where performance up badging is rife across the industry, it's refreshing to see a car as standard that goes as well as it looks, like this Ateca. But then again, it does cost around $66,000 on the road, so I wouldn't say it's exactly cheap. But before we dive into what makes this Cupra Ateca tick, let's take a look at the 3 best and the 3 not so good aspects of it. Let's kick things off with the bronze accents, because if you know anything about Cupra, you'd know that their hero colours are black and bronze, and that's evident across the Ateca. With up here, a bronze badge, then around the side, you've got bronze wheels. The second best thing in my eyes are these optional Brembo calipers, also finished in bronze, but that pack is going to set you back at least $4,000. The next aspect I want to talk about is this Akrapovic exhaust. Because it's optional in the Cupra Ateca, it is a $6,000 option, so I wouldn't exactly say it's cheap, but when paired with this SUV, it sounds phenomenal. Man, this thing barks. It's kind of a no-brainer in my eyes. And finally, I want to talk about this multi-function steering wheel, because it's quite cool. It's got tactile buttons, which is a surprise to see on Volkswagen products, because what you've seen of the Golf and the Tiguan, they've all moved to these haptic touch things, which just leaves me longing for good old-fashioned pushy buttons. Also gets a pair of shifter paddles, but I mean, you expect that from a performance car of this age. But also, bronze accents and these cool little button things, which Porsche kind of made famous, but here they're cool because on one side you get an engine start button, the other side you get a Cupra button that you can select the drive modes with. Cool. On the things that I'm not so into, I mean, while the steering wheel is great, this weird fake carbon fibre thing they've got going on here, I know it points to the sporty nature of the car, but I'm just not a fan of fake carbon fibre. Back on the inside, I'm actually quite surprised at the lack of soft touch materials. I mean, you do get it up here, but down here, all plastic, which I'm kind of surprised about. And lastly, I don't know, I kind of like having USB-A ports as opposed to USB-Cs, and Cupra has obviously gone away. They're living in the future because there's only USB-C ports, so upgrade your cables, people. On the design front, there's actually quite a bit to talk about with this Cupra Ateca. Take the front here for instance. Look how angry these daytime running lights look. It's like grrr. Then the bumper, the grille, everything's just grrr, angry Spanish car. Down the side of the Ateca, there's no denying the Volkswagen roots, and this is evident in the mirrors, door handles, and C-pillar window. The same Volkswagen theme continues around the back, but it's pretty obvious that it's a Cupra here. There's a big Cupra badge, Cupra lettering, and a diffuser that surrounds the Akrapovic exhaust. On the inside of the Cupra Ateca, space is plenty. I mean, I've got headroom, legroom, it's comfortable. I also quite like these seats because they come in blue leather as standard, which is a novelty I really like. I mean, this car is kind of pretty normal in most parts, but blue leather seats, who would have thought? Great. They also come with integrated headrests and a lot of side bolstering, so when you're pushing this thing through corners, these seats really hold you in place and are remarkably comfortable. All the tactile buttons are fantastic. I mentioned before how Volkswagen moved away. Cupra has been like, nah, we're going to put as many physical buttons in this car as possible. I mean, the screen has weird touch buttons down the side, but all the climate control controls, all the steering wheel, even the handbrake, well, I suppose handbrakes are normally plastic, but I just love how many plastic buttons there are. On the practicality front, there's a decent amount of space in the door cards. You get a wireless charger as standard in the Ateca, which is cool. A pair of cup holders, a big one and a small one. Again, I guess if you're drinking different sized drinks, some people do that, I assume. Center console, decent amount of space. And as I mentioned before, USB-C ports everywhere, so throw away those A cables. On the cabin technology front, I am a little surprised at the lack of heads-up display up here, considering this car's price point. But then again, the 10.2-inch digital cluster behind the steering wheel here is in usual Volkswagen fashion. It's great to use. You also get a 9.2-inch infotainment display, which has a great operating system, looks really nice, but it also supports both wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, so there's no need for those cables anyway. In terms of a sound system, it gets Beats audio, which I guess appeals to millennials like me, because back in high school, all the cool kids had Beats. In a car it's cool, but if I'm honest, it doesn't actually sound that great. I mean, it's not owned by Dr. Dre anymore either, so what's the point? One thing that I was interested to find in here was the fact that the traction control button is where the start and stop button usually is in Volkswagen cars. I guess this kind of hints at the track-orientated nature of this car, and Cupra's like to its drivers, come on, have a bit of fun with me, turn traction control off, which I can't actually advise. In terms of drive selectors, you can choose it from either this rotary dial down here or the aforementioned Cupra button on the steering wheel, but this Cupra button looks a lot cooler, so I always find myself using it. Back in the second row seating here, headroom, there's a heap of it. Legroom, there's quite a bit, but in the center seat here, I mean the seat's flat, so it's got that going for it, but the transmission tunnel is massive, so whoever's sitting back here is going to have to awkwardly kind of straddle it, which isn't a great thing. In terms of appointments, it gets the same funky blue leather back here, which is cool, but what I found interesting was you'll notice these door cards here look the same as a soft touch material up front, where in reality back here, hard plastic. Not the end of the world, but just an interesting aspect I noticed. On the amenities front, backseat occupants get a pair of air conditioning vents here, a pair of USB-C chargers down here, and if buyers opt for the $1,800 panoramic sunroof option, you'd get a lot of visibility out the roof. On the topic of the boot, the Ateca comes standard with a power tailgate, which is cool. But then once it's open, you'll get access to 485 litres of space. You also get one of these cool pokey ski-through hole things so you can take your family skiing in the Alps. Another cool thing to do. On the topic of what it costs to keep this Cupra Ateca on the road, Cupra claims a combined fuel economy figure of 7.7 litres per 100 kilometres. During a calm driving urban route, we found that it would do 7.8 litres per 100 kilometres. Then when we decided to push the Cupra through some back roads and use it as the performance car it's designed to be, the worst we saw was 10.8 litres per 100 kilometres, but then again, that settled on the way back to the office at 9.2 litres per 100 kilometres, which is a fair trade-off, I figure. On the servicing front, Cupra actually offers the first 3 years free with the Ateca, but then adding on another 2 years to make it a 5-year plan in total costs $1,200. In total, this 5-year service plan will go to 75,000 kilometres with service intervals every 15,000 kilometres. And in terms of warranty, Cupra offers a 5-year unlimited kilometre plan on this Ateca. On the road, there's no getting past the fact that this Cupra Ateca is a reskinned VW. I mean, the interior, the drivetrain, the chassis, but that's not really a bad thing. But speaking of the chassis, this actually rides on the first iteration of the MQB platform, the MQB A1, and interesting fact, it's actually shared with one of Volkswagen's wildest cars, the T-Roc Cabriolet. I need to drive that, but man, what a car that would be. But anyway, back to my point. This platform, it's actually really good. And then under the bonnet there sits a 2-litre turbocharged engine that makes 221 kilowatts and 400 newton meters of torque. This isn't the same engine that's shed across the new Golf R and the new Tiguan R, because that gets the new generation one, making 235 kilowatts. But even so, this is one heck of a turbocharged power plant, and that 221 kilowatts is more than enough in my opinion. On the power delivery front, a 7-speed dual clutch transmission sends power to all 4 wheels, and in terms of performance, Cupra claims that this Ateca can hit 100 kilometers an hour in just 4.9 seconds. Though we haven't independently tested that claim, I wouldn't be denying it, because this thing feels really fast. In terms of drive modes, the Cupra Ateca has 6 to choose from, but most of the time drivers will find themselves choosing between comfort, sport, and the Cupra mode, which is its most hardcore mode. There's also an off-road mode and a snow mode, as well as an individual setting one where you can tailor it to your needs. But interestingly enough, in comfort and sport, not a whole heap changes apart from, the exhaust gets a bit louder, which is fantastic, and the suspension rides a little bit stiffer, but it's still not much different than standard because there's barely any body roll on this SUV. Getting into Cupra mode is where things get really spicy, because the exhaust somehow gets even louder and that Akrapovic exhaust is just barking away back there. The suspension really stiffens up, and the steering, it gets a lot tighter and a lot heavier. But I'd argue that's not really necessary, because the steering as standard in this car is really good, and I quite like how quick and light it is between comfort and sport mode. You do get a bit more confidence in it in Cupra mode, but I just don't think the weightedness of it is really that necessary. As standard, this Cupra Ateca comes on 19-inch bronze accented wheels, which look cool. Surprisingly, the ride is still quite good. It's firm, but that's the performance nature of this car, as I'm just avoiding potholes here. But even in hitting these potholes, which I didn't, I hope you know, it's still not a bad ride. I wouldn't call it brittle, it's firm, but still comfortable. Another aspect of the Cupra Ateca that really impressed me was how dynamic the chassis is. Considering it's sitting on that old generation MQB, I didn't have high hopes for it, but the way this car turns in and how the back end rotates is really impressive for a small SUV, especially considering that, family-friendly practicality is the forefront of mind when designing something like this. As I mentioned before, this car here is fitted with the optional $4,000 Brembo brakes, and the stopping force is immense. I've been driving a few back roads and I haven't experienced any brake fade, and I guess that's why you would option them over the standard brakes, which might fade easier. And there's no way that I can talk about how good this Ateca is without talking about that fantastic Akrapovic exhaust out back. I'm actually surprised how quiet it is inside, but when you get it in Cupra mode, you wind down the windows a little bit, you really hear how loud that thing barks, and the pops and bangs are cool at low revs, but when you're revving this engine out, the pops up high, they're very pronounced. But then also, I want to talk about the sound that this engine makes up high in the rev range. It's worth diving into. This engine really rewards drivers for just blasting that loud pedal, and as the Kiwis say, give it a bit of jandle. If there's one little criticism that I have of this car, it's a lack of playfulness, but I mean, that's kind of what I've come to expect from all the Volkswagen Group cars, well, at least the performance cars. I know that this isn't an M car, and I can't expect it to oversteer on the drop of a dime, but I am a little disappointed by how safe I feel that Cupra is playing with this car. It will understeer, but I mean, that's not overly fun when you're really pushing it, but the four-wheel drive system doesn't really do anything but understeer, and I am a little disappointed, but I mean, I've experienced that already with the Golf R and like every single Audi RS car that I've driven, so I didn't have high hopes coming into it. On the safety front, the Cupra Ateca comes with, I mean, everything you're going to need in a modern car. This includes adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring. I mean, it's got the whole suite, and that comes as standard. My one criticism of the system, I mean, I can't really be too harsh on it because it's really just doing its job, is the lane keep assist system. When it's being overly touchy, when you're having fun on a back road and you might be coming close to the lines, it will grab the steering, but that's not a hard thing to turn off, so it isn't a deal breaker in my eyes. Those that know me will know that I'm somewhat of a Volkswagen tragic, which is why I'm struggling to like this Ateca over something like the new Tiguan R. But with its spicy Spanish aesthetic and its even more spicy powertrain, this Cupra Ateca oozes character, and I'm here for it. My one complaint with this Ateca would be around the lack of playfulness on the road, which is one area where the Tiguan R betters it with its fancy new rear torque splitting differential. But then again, that's probably besides the point, because owners of this Cupra Ateca probably care less about actual track day performance and more about leaving an impression on the street. And that's something this Spanish car does extremely well. Those are my thoughts on the Cupra Ateca. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and while you're down there, be sure to subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.